Hello. Welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. I was 4 years old when I saw my first anime. Well, it wasn't called anime back then. We hadn't even really gotten in the habit of calling it Japanese animation, but up to this point in time, I kind of liked robots. Robots were my thing. It kind of translated through to my son, as he still has a robot obsession, which serves him well in a robotics club. But I'd seen Thunderbirds and Get Smart, and there's a robot on there, and anytime there's a robot involved in something, they had me. I was that child of 1960s science fiction. I looked up robots, had robots bookmarked in my Encyclopedia Britannica. I liked robots. So, 4-year-old me, sitting in front of the television, flipping through channels, all like 6 of the channels available to me at the time. And then there was something I'd never seen before. It was a cartoon. I'd seen cartoons, but it was about a robot. It wasn't just a robot. It was big. One might even say a giant robot. It had a body the shape of an egg. For some reason, it had kind of a Roman gladiator crest on its head and a big pointy nose, one of these cartoonish eyes, and a jetpack, and I had never seen anything so cool in my entire life. It wasn't just that there was a robot, but there was a kid. And the kid had this thing with one lever on it with which he could make the robot do anything. The show was called Gigantor. I spent the next 15 minutes running back and forth between the spot in front of the television in the living room where I was watching it and to my mother in the kitchen, reporting every detail of this new experience, telling her everything that was happening in this new show with the robot. The show was the Japanese show Tetsujin 28, but brought into America, translated rapidly by the Translux folks, and retitled Gigantor. I'd been hooked on robots before Gigantor, but oh my gosh. Gigantor opened my eyes to a whole new realm of what robots could be a part of what a robot could do. And he fought other robots, and that was awesome. Sometimes he was fighting cultists or bank robbers or international terrorists, but it was best when they had their own giant robot to fight Gigantor with. There are aliens that had a robot, sent it down robot, and Gigantor had to beat him up every so often. Really filled my young head. Over the years, Gigantor would stick with me. There were other bits of Japanese animation that I dearly loved from the time. There was Speed Racer, of course. Still, my life isn't complete unless I've got all the episodes on DVD. Any number of other smaller productions. The Amazing 3. I never really got a chance to see Eighth Man in its original run, but that was fun. That was good. But even on the west coast of America in the early 1970s, this stuff just wasn't all that available. Then a local UHF channel started rebroadcasting some more recent anime shows from Japan. Well, Japanese animation still at the time. And I was introduced to the entire giant super robo hero genre. Usha Raiden, Getarobo, Shin Getarobo, the second series, UFO Diapolon, those three in particular, and there were some live action shows that I saw alongside those. The Go Rangers, it's a little show about 5 people who could change into multicolored costume versions of themselves and fight guys who are all in the same uniform, which years and years later would become the foundation for the Power Rangers. But I digress. I'm talking about giant robots. And in the midst of this mania that I developed for these giant robot shows, which were dynamite in my young mind. Gosh, what was I? 72, 73? 5, 6, somewhere in there. Getting on towards 7. My brother discovered a store in Gardena, California, not far from us, called Kunimatsuya, that imported the toys that went along with these shows and others. So I would go to this store, and if I was lucky, I got something from it. It was usually Scout's been good, let's take him to Kunimatsuya kind of thing, where I met other giant robot shows. Didn't have them on videotape or anything like that, not at the time. We were lucky just to see that they existed, and I got to know UFO Grandizer and Guy King, and I was introduced to a toy line called Microman, or Microman, which a decade later would become Micronauts. Nuts over those, just bought all I could. Got all that I could bought for me because I didn't have any money, young boy. It really shaped things in there. I really love me some giant robots. And it took a long time for me to really dig into the depth of what was available giant robot-wise. See, I'd seen 3 shows, and they were 3 of, well, Raiden was probably one of the biggest early influences on the whole genre. And then you had Getarobo, which has its own huge following. UFO Diapolon was never as big, but it was still it was still one of the better ones. No internet, not that many other people watching the shows, not a lot of people for me to talk to about it. The people at Kunimatsuya had seen a bunch of stuff, but yeah, other people seeing it and getting any in-depth information, I almost learned Japanese. I almost learned the katakana so I could read the back of the boxes at Kunimatsuya and get any more information about this stuff. Nowadays, we have the internet. So I can not only find out more information about these shows, I can see a lot of them on YouTube. I found someone selling DVDs of the entire run of Usha Raiden and bought them. they're all in Japanese. There's no translation. That's okay. I kind of know what's going on. It's not hard to figure things out. So, I've spent a lot of time with giant robots. It was one thing to daydream giant robots and draw giant robots and have adventures in my head. Share some of those adventures with my friends and playing make-believe. They never really got the same thing that I did out of it, but they didn't have the background of having seen it, watching it, and they only had what I could explain, or the images of playing with my toys of them to involve themselves with what the whole thing was about. I was early. I wasn't among the earliest people to play D&D. I was 12 the first time I heard about Dungeons and Dragons, and it was third hand through a newspaper article, and I'd only heard bits and pieces about it. But I got into role-playing shortly after that, between 12 and 14. I was never really a fantasy role player. I liked Dungeons and Dragons. It was the role-playing game for people who were playing role-playing games at the time. I discovered others shortly after. My dad took me to a science fiction-based hobby shop in St. Louis that I wish was still there. But got me my first black box edition of Traveler, and I was deep into the space gaming and was starting to realize how awesome science fiction role-playing was. I own a copy of Star Frontiers. TSR's latest entry into the science fiction role-playing market, which had some interesting ideas and got expanded a little bit, but never took off the way their other products did. TSR had a lot of false starts around that time. For every Dungeons and Dragons or Top Secret, there was a Star Frontiers or a Boot Hill or something else that didn't work out quite as well and isn't just remembered or as popular. But then on a trip out to California, having moved back and forth and traveling back and forth because I had family back here while I lived in St. Louis, went to a store called Gamesmanship. Was it Games? Yeah, it was Gamesmanship. No longer exists. So many friendly local gaming stores not there. And this was in a mall. It was in Costa Mesa Mall. And I found something. Oh, God. No, I'm going to take that back. I did not find this originally in Gamesmanship. I found this in the Wyvern's Nest in St. Louis first. The memories are hazy. The items are very sharp. The events around them. But I found R. Talsorian Games Mekton, first edition. And role-playing games and Japanese giant robot combat finally met. I must have been like 16, 15, 16. But wow, that was life-changing. That was something. The artwork in the original Mekton isn't all that great. System's a little clumsy. It's when they started off with Interlock, the one that eventually worked its way into Cyberpunk 2020. And there was some compatibility between the games, but not a lot. I'll get to that later. But it was a game about mecha. It was a game about Japanese giant robots. It was a game about the genre that I loved and I pursued, and I thought nobody understood the way that I did. And here is Mekton. It wasn't perfect, but oh my God, it was a start. It was a good start because they followed Mekton up with some very good books. Amongst those, Road Striker, the Transformable Vehicle Supplement, and the Mekton Advanced Tactical System, which started to introduce more important things, but was still a little bit clumsy in its execution, hard to understand exactly how everything worked. I followed Mekton religiously. Mekton 2 came out. I had a copy of Mekton 2. I had several copies. That's what I picked up at Gamesmanship in Costa Mesa, was my first copy of Mekton 2. And Road Striker 2. And if I made one of my trips from St. Louis to California or California to St. Louis and left a Mekton book behind, I got another Mekton book. I had collections in the Midwest and on the coast, because you cannot be without your Mekton. Cannot be without those rules. Mekton Zeta came out. I bought Mekton Zeta. Mekton Zeta Plus, the technical manual, that book was life-changing because it made me understand how you could begin to manipulate things, manipulate the universe, and use concepts in ways that perhaps the people who first envisioned them had never thought they could be. Some of the best role-playing games I've ever been a part of, running or playing, were in Mekton, using the Mekton technical manual. One of my dear friends, who is no longer with us, Brian Sullivan, was a genius of using this system. Created worlds based around the use of giant robots. And those were amazing, fascinating games to be a part of. And I was walking around in the genre I loved so much. If I'm having a problem writing a product about this stuff, and I am, it's because there's so much in my head to get out. And I understand it in a certain way, but other people understand it differently. And I need to bridge that gap. And that's difficult. It's harder to do with something you really know and you really love, because I already have a very functional understanding of the concepts involved. And I cannot write the book at that level. There are other people who understand it as well or better than me. Probably a good number of people who understand it better than I do, but do not have the same understanding that I do. If I write a book based entirely on my understanding of the genre, then I will lose everyone trying to follow me, at least in this endeavor. Which would be terrible, because I think I can write a really good mecha book. The trick of it is, I have to break my own understanding of this genre down to its base elements and start from scratch and present it as best I can. I can't just start blathering on about what I know and how it matches with the system that I created that might very well already work with it. If you tweak it a little bit, that's not the approach I need. Plus which, breaking a genre down into its component elements lets you play with it on a conceptual level. If you watch a lot of anime, I do not watch as much anime as I probably should. Recent anime is difficult for me to follow. It's changed a lot. You know, I really loved the initial Bubblegum Crisis series. It didn't sound even vaguely interesting when I heard it the first time. But then it became, it was available at Blockbuster, and it was there, and there were chicks in powered armor, and so why not watch that? And oh my God, Bubblegum Crisis was so groundbreaking and so good, and the mech designs were so fascinating. It's a great series. It really is. Bubblegum Crisis, AD Police, Bubblegum Crash. That's good anime. Bubblegum 2040, the remake, the completely unnecessary remake. I understood where they were coming from, and they wanted to update some of the concepts and the ideas, and it was unnecessary. It didn't need to be done. I didn't like it. And I have that feeling about a lot of remakes and modern anime. And it all just starts to blend together into this Tokyo pop nightmare for me. So, I'm a classicist when it comes to my anime and my mecha shows. But if you watch a lot of anime, you have a background in it. There is no one genre into which mecha shows exclusively fall. There isn't just, they're not all space shows. They're not all near modern cyberpunk shows. They're across the board. You have these fantasy alternate realities where you have mecha in medieval times or during World War II, in far-flung futures, or even in completely alternate realities where the laws of physics are different. It's incredible. It's incredible to see the diversity of concepts that go through here. One of my favorite animes of all time is Big O. Which is actually a collaboration between folks from the Warner Brothers studio and some Japanese animation studios. They wanted to work together and learn one another's techniques, mostly based on how awesome the mood and atmosphere of Batman the Animated Series was. And they came up with Big O, and Big O happens in this completely manufactured alternate near future history where everyone forgot everything 40 years ago and just try and stumble on. And it gets into some really reality bending things. And it is just, it's incredible. It defies defining it into a convention. It becomes a genre in and of itself. Which means, as far as role-playing games, in my head, that means there is no setting in which giant robots cannot be included. Powered armored giant robots, giant war machines, I don't care what you call them, they're mecha. And I will liberally sprinkle them throughout everything. I don't even know that I'm throwing mecha at you in a game. It's guys in suits of powered armor. That's mecha of a sort. And it's an orcish walking tank. 8 orcs walking on a treadmill inside to provide it the power and catapults on top. It's a mech. When I was young, I routinely fell for the biggest gimmick that television producers could throw: the crossover. Crossover episodes of shows that I watched routinely always nailed me in that chair with my eyes wide open and my heart fluttered, because those little imaginary worlds that I put myself in my imagination, got a little bit bigger. Oh my God, those people know each other. Wait, Batman and Superman can work together? The whole early Filmation's League of Superheroes, the the Justice League, Hawkman and the Atom and Green Lantern and Superman. Oh my God, that was a crossover. They did the individual episodes and then they teamed them all up for this stuff, and heart palpitations, adrenaline flowing. It's like, this is incredible. Because I had tried to imagine what it would be like if those people were together, and then it happened. And, Sanford and Son on in Hawaii, and the Hawaii Five-0 theme starts playing, and I watched both those shows, and oh my God, Fred Sanford might meet the guys from Hawaii Five-0. Did the guys from Adam 12 ever meet the guys from Emergency? I don't know if that ever happened, but if it had, I'd have been glued to my seat. When people from shows that I watched met people from shows that I watched. And that started me crossing genres. It didn't ever have to make sense. The Jetsons met the Flintstones. The Jetsons met the friggin' Flintstones. Although I am fond of the fan theory that the Jetsons and the Flintstones live in exactly the same world, it's just that all of that dust and pollution beneath the Jetsons' house, towering up in the sky, under that, the whole world has devolved into this bizarre low technology to get away from producing any more pollution, and the last vestiges of their technology is the genetic engineering that they use to make their biotechnology. The dinosaurs. But I digress. If you watched anime in the late 70s, early 80s, you saw a transformation happen. It went from the giant superhero robo shows, like Usha Raideen, Get a Robo, and dozens of... There were loads of those. An incredible volume of those. But they weren't realistic. They were space fantasy. They were epic fantasy. The robots could move and do kung fu and backflips, even though they rather obviously didn't have any kind of articulation or system for doing so. It wasn't realistic. They were giant superheroes more than anything that you could actually sit down and design as a robot. Then came shows like Mobile Suit Gundam, where they took time to design the mecha as machines, to actually formulate what would it take for a machine to be able to do this. Gundam is huge. Gundam has a illustrious history as an anime with sequels and spin-offs, and I have no less than 20 models in my office from Mobile Suit Gundam and its various associated series. Even the dumb ones. I'm sorry, G Gundam wasn't good. And then shortly after that, we got the Super Dimensional Fortress Macross. And the game changed because we saw recognizable military hardware. Fighter jets that we could easily mistake for existing models in the world, except they transformed into giant freaking robots. And they did it with thought and design. I had a model of the Valkyrie, the fighter from Macross. I built it when I was too young to build it and didn't have all of my model building skills under my, and it was a hard build. It was an extremely hard build. But it worked. Yeah, there were a couple of places where you pull things off and put things back on when you were doing the transformation, but it transformed. It could transform to all three modes: fighter, Jarwalk, Guardian, and the humanoid mode. But enough thought had gone into the anime that the models based off of it actually had some mechanical validity to them. And the series that came after only improved on that. Yeah, the fighters got more science fiction-y and more advanced, and it didn't hurt things at all. In America, we saw this as Robotech, and they took 3 or 4 different series, Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, and Genesis Clanner Mospeada, and Southern Cross, and mixed them up and made one continuous storyline out of them, which worked because the mechanical designs were very similar, and they looked like they'd come from the same basis in technology. Gave it all its own background and underwriting current, and it worked really, really well. But that stuff's amazing. It sparked a whole new generation of role-playing games. It gave Palladium a shot. It was one of the biggest coups I've ever seen a role-playing publisher pull. It's when Palladium had got the license for producing Robotech. And that is... I'm not going to say a single bad thing about Palladium's system other than I prefer to use a different system when I use Palladium's material, but I will use the crap out of Palladium's material because no one does backup and background information and details like they do. So having those Robotech books to access and look at and to study their statistics and how they saw things going together, and just gives you a richer experience when you watch the anime. It all kinds of blends together. And because Palladium uses their system in all of their books, and Palladium also has Rifts, which is the ultimate cross-genre mix of everything involved in all of their games. You can throw Robotech mechs into any genre. Fantasy, superheroes. Oh my god, if I had a Saber Cyclone for my investigators and Beyond the Supernatural, the forces of the outside would have had an entirely different experience. I like cross-genre play. I am a fan of mixing things that people don't think should go together, and yet somehow they do. I dip my Oreos in orange juice. Yeah, people are going to, ew, but I say try it. Okay, little tangent here, food tangent, because I go on those every so often. An old remedy that my family has for having a sour stomach or not feeling well is mix half and half of 7-Up and milk. Now, a number of people who have just heard me say that are going, ew, 7-Up and milk. But you like 7-Up. You probably like 7-Up. You like milk. They're two things that you like. And I don't know why you would imagine that mixing them causes some kind of magical chemical reaction that turns either of them or both of them into something that you don't like. Try it. I can drink it recreationally. It tastes good. That's the approach that I take to role-playing games at times. Yes, I will throw some things into my fantasy games that traditionally don't belong in fantasy games. Robots and laser beams and... Yes, this is an axe. This axe is made out of star metal. It has a battery in it that will never run out, and it hums and cuts through steel. The warrior who controls this has an edge over people who don't have this. Unless you got some kind of magical weapon to compensate, and then you got to be careful, you might lose it, because that thing will cut through a weapon. You have to be very careful when, in amongst this mixing of genres, you throw giant robots into it. Because giant robots will end your regular campaign very quickly if they're not used. Normally, if you have a late introduction of giant robots, well, we've been running around and fighting orcs and goblins, and wow, now we've got giant robots. Or, wow, now the orcs have giant robots. One tap dancing giant robot can ruin your whole week. So there's a certain amount of balance that has to happen. We've foreseen this is going to... I mentioned it once before. You want to know how to balance giant robots into your campaign. People who did it best? Power Rangers. The old Sentai shows. Because not only do you have these robots ready to go, and all of them have 15 gimmicks, and then they all combine into one robot, but you also have a philosophy behind the use of the robots that you are handed. You can't escalate. You match the amount of force that you are faced with the appropriate amount of force. The Nostalgia Critic did a good bit on that and violated the crap out of that, but it's kind of the Nostalgia Critic's thing. But there are a number of reasons for a group of people who have giant robots to not just whip them out every time someone steals a candy bar from the store down the street. Giant robots cause a lot of collateral damage. You don't want to whip them out if you don't have to. Unless collateral damage is your thing. It works great for a villain's campaign. Giant robots are expensive to maintain. They may have fuel that costs a great deal. It may cost a lot to repair damage done to them. And if they're launching rockets and missiles, that could be someone's whole paycheck every time they pull a trigger. There's a lot of good reasons to put a limit on your giant robot. But when you need a giant robot, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. I mentioned Brian Sullivan and the games that he ran. He created a world where things would fall out of the sky randomly from other dimensions all over the place. Monsters and dragons and horrors. And in order to prepare for that, to deal with that, people had giant friggin' robots with which they could do battle with whatever fell out of the sky at a moment's notice. And I think that's a good approach. I think it's an excellent approach. Not everyone enjoyed the games the way I did. Not everyone got the philosophy behind them because there was a lot of cultural stuff in the background that may or may not have worked out very well. But the fact that you had a giant robot and you used it to go out and beat up things that fell out of the sky and threatened to destroy civilization, there's very little arguing with that. That's awesome. This is kind of me emptying my head out of some ideas as I go into this process of redesigning my mecha book and bringing it out stronger, harder, and better. Because I'm not going to put out a bad mecha book. If I don't put everything I possibly can into this, I cannot claim my love for the genre that I love so dearly. Well, Kind of a personal journey there, but that's kind of what I do. I keep having the urge to talk about politics, and I keep having wiser voices tell me that I really need to not do that because I don't want to upset people. As time goes on and the vitriol starts to rise, I may discuss communication process. I may discuss how we need to keep our discourse civil. I'm going to try not to discuss politics. But that means I might have to blow a gasket and let go on religion at some point in time. Who knows? In the meantime, I'm Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me. I'll see you next time on the next Matters of Decorum.